Ladies and gentlemen, it's finally here. The patch notes for Wolverine's return to the meta featuring Sabertooth. Now, it's a pretty exciting patch. We'll talk all about it. First off, you have the fact that it's a rolling patch. So there's no maintenance and then downtime. It'll start launching at around 8 p.m. Pacific, which is 11 p.m. Eastern time. So about 14 hours after the drop of this video. But it's usually about half an hour early. So just do what you will with that. But that's all happening tonight. So in about 12 hours, more or less, I'll see you guys again here on YouTube for a live stream. Because, of course, I cannot miss the Wolverine Glow Up event. I'm super duper excited. So Wolverine's getting the X Deaths of Wolverine, the sort of Warlock-inspired data, whatever you want to call it. He looks like a microchip. It looks really cool. I love this uniform. It looks awesome, and it looks different from all of his other uniforms. It's not just like a rehash of the Jim Lee one or whatever. Although I like those uniforms, don't get me wrong, right? It's not like a back to basics Wolverine just yet. Woo! Okay, let's get into the nitty gritty now. So his uniform effect is going to give him 15% chain hit, 40/40 on the skill damage bonus damage, and then he's going to give him, when he drops below 30%, he's going to get a 100% heal, which is sort of like a revive. Now, this is essentially the same as what his current uniform effect does, except they've bumped the skill damage and bonus damage up. Previously, his skill damage bonus damage was 30 and 35. So bumping 30 to 40 is a pretty big deal. They've also lowered the cooldown from 140 seconds on this heal to 100 seconds. Could he survive 100 seconds? Probably not for PvP, let's be honest. But maybe. Who knows? But he can certainly do that for PvE, which is very, very nice because 100 seconds is under 2 minutes. So this could potentially proc 3 times during a fight, could save you a bunch even if you don't have Wolverine's uniform. Artifact. You need the uniform. Yeah, I'm talking about the artifact. His ultimate skill, it's kind of hard to see what has changed. Obviously, they removed the burn damage because he's not Phoenix Force anymore. So that's going to be the big change for Wolverine, is that he no longer deals elemental damage. So just a spoiler, or not spoiler, like a PSA to you guys. If you have, or if you had a CTP of Judgment on him, or a fire damage proc obelisk, that's not going to really work well anymore because he does not deal any elemental damage. So that's the big one there. Otherwise, this looks pretty similar. I think they bumped up his invincibility from 7 seconds to 10 seconds. They kept the accumulation, not only the percentage accumulation, but how much he gains and the amount of time. It's still 130% of his physical attack, except it just does physical damage. It doesn't do anything else. And then, yeah, they bumped up his penetration from 7 seconds to 10 seconds. I believe they also added ignore dodge. Yeah, the 80% ignore dodge wasn't here before, so they did add one line of text, the 80% ignore dodge. That is very meaningful to make sure that when Wolverine pops his tier 3, Spider-Man's gonna die, all those web heads are going to die, which is very, very nice. His passive stays essentially the same. He keeps the 20% ignore defense. He keeps the 25% damage reduction, so they didn't increase his damage reduction, they didn't increase his healing. Here, he keeps his 50-50-50, exactly the same across the board. That's all the same. And then we have the following skills: Cyber Wound, Future Pursuit, sounds so cool, Perfect Hunt, Claw Tear, and Omega Slash. So let's talk about it here. We have pretty short cooldowns on his skills: 8 seconds, 9 seconds, 13, 13, 16. So very potentially very proc friendly, very easy to play. So they haven't sort of screwed with that. They actually made his cooldowns a little bit shorter. So his third skill used to have a 15-second cooldown, so they dropped it by 2 seconds. And then his fifth skill used to have a 17-second cooldown that they dropped by 1 second. That's quite nice. I think the thing people are going to notice the most is that his third skill lost a lot of effects. So his third skill before, right, the burning counter, had counter attack and had iframe ignore. So they removed the counter entirely. Wolverine no longer has a counter. And then they shifted the iframe ignore from his third skill onto his fifth skill. That's actually a good thing that we'll get into a little bit later. But if we look at his third skill right now, when we talk about his fifth skill, he still retains the 5 seconds of invincibility and the 50% attack buff. So he keeps that. They lowered the buff by 1 second, to be honest. But he had a bunch of other effects on his third skill that they shifted around to other skills. So he used to have penetration on his third skill. He doesn't anymore because they moved it. And then he used to have decreased debuff duration for himself, which allows him to cleanse debuffs faster. They also moved that to another skill. So again, it's not gone. It's just most of the effects are just being moved to other skills. And then he also had 2 seconds of immunity, which doesn't matter because now he has 5 seconds of invincibility, which is way better, right? For PvP in general, invincibility is better. Immunity is technically a little bit better for PvE, but not a lot of bosses cleanse anymore. Thanos was kind of the last boss that would cleanse your buffs. So invincibility is actually a lot better than it used to be. His 4th skill, pretty straightforward, just has paralysis and damage and a couple of other effects. And then his 5th skill is really where you make the bread. You know, this is really where the beans get cooked. It applies, you know, incapacitation to enemies, and it has the iframe ignore. And then for Wolverine, it gives him all of the buffs. So instead of having a 50% penetration chance, it's now 60%. So they bumped that up. He's got a frenzy buff, a 30, 10, 20 frenzy buff. He's got the 40% proc, which he always had on his 5th skill, so they didn't change that. Or actually, he didn't have it. He did have the frenzy buff, so they kept the frenzy buff. I don't know where that proc was. Maybe the proc is new. Oh no, he had an 80% proc for 2 attacks, and then so they've lowered it to a 40% proc for 1 attack. That's fine. And then he keeps the ignore dodge, 50% ignore dodge for 7 seconds, which I believe was previously on his 4th skill at 40%. And then they bumped up the decreased debuff duration to 90% from his 3rd skill. Oh, it was 90% before. Anyways, they bumped up the duration by 2 seconds. It's a bit confusing here. Decreases debuff duration. That sounds like a bad thing. No, it's a really good thing. So it applies to self. It doesn't apply to enemies. And so it decreases the duration of any debuffs that are on Wolverine by 90%. So basically, it acts like a cleanse, but it lasts 7 seconds, which is really important because it means any new debuffs that are applied will also have their duration reduced by 90%, which is really, really strong. So even if you have like a 3-second stun, it's just going to be, you know, gone in about half a second or less, right? It's going to be gone right away. So really, really strong there. Very, very strong ability. And then we'll just have to see how much damage he does. But I'm really excited. He looks like he could be very good for PvP. Obviously, the artifact does a lot of heavy lifting there. If you guys don't know, Wolverine's artifact, it has the immortality effect, right? The guard break immunity and then the immortality effect. So that is that's something to keep in mind if you're going to be building him up for PvP. He kind of needs this one like pretty much all of the other immortality artifact characters need for PvP, like Magic, Mr. Sinister, and of course, most notably, for now, Carnage. So that's it for Wolverine. A lot of buffs, in my opinion. Some of them minor, but it should all add up to being quite a big hit for him. And then we have Sabertooth. Now, Sabertooth, this is his 1st uniform, so by comparison, these buffs are going to look pretty insane. But remember, it's his 1st uniform, and they also have to make him competitive in the current game at only tier 3. Now, Sabertooth is getting his tier 3, so get those combat books ready, and then you have a tough decision, a Sophie's choice, if you will, if you haven't tier 3'd Wolverine yet, and you want to tier 3 both of them. Now, as far as Sabertooth goes, his uniform effect is going to give him guard break immunity, which is pretty serious, 40% damage reduction, and 20% chain hit, so very strong effects right out the gate. Then his new skills with short cooldowns like 7 seconds, 9 seconds, 15, 15, and 15, all quite nice, are going to do the following for him. He has iframe ignore on his 2nd skill, so awesome to see that they haven't forgotten what this does and that it exists. He's got a ton of different effects. What's most notable is they're bringing back the mockery effect. So mockery is taunt. So he's going to have a taunt effect on his 2nd skill, which also has iframe ignore. So that should be very spicy to see what happens. It also increases his attack, or sorry, this applies to enemies. It increases their attack, but then they do not receive any penetration buffs for 4 seconds. So this is pretty nuts. If you can apply this to enemies, right, and it can't be cleansed, yeah, and it says cannot be removed with the remove all debuffs effect. Well, the mockery can't. I don't think the second part applies necessarily, but basically, enemies won't be able to kill him, right? If you slap like a mighty or a brilliant authority on him, they won't be able to kill him for 4 seconds because they won't be able to get penetration. They won't be able to like use. They'll be able to use skills that have penetration, but they won't get the penetration, right? Unless they have. It's unclear if it stops them from gaining the buff or if it stops them outright from doing those things, because some characters have it as part of their passive rather than having it on an active skill. So that's something to be explored, but that's a very, very powerful effect if it can work, right? Stopping other characters from penetrating is probably the most powerful PvP skill we've ever seen. So I don't want to exaggerate this because it already is in the game. I believe Blue Marvel had this effect, and he didn't end up having much of an impact in PvP. He certainly had the mockery effect. I don't know if he had the... he did also have that effect, yeah. And he had it actually for 15 seconds rather than 4 seconds. So I don't want to get too crazy here. It's the top line in brown there, or the bottom brown line. I don't want to get too crazy here about Sabertooth, but it is a very powerful effect if it works. It also gives him a barrier, it also cleanses his debuffs, and it also gives him a 40% chance to penetrate. And all of that with the iframe ignore, which is very, very nice. And then he gets incapacitation paralysis, he gets super armor, and then he gets a frenzy buff with 5 seconds of immunity on his 3rd skill. His 4th skill gives him 5 seconds of invincibility plus skill damage bonus damage. It kind of sucks that some of these effects are tied to his skills rather than being tied to his passives. As you can see here, he actually doesn't have any changes to his passives at all on his uniform. And from what I gather, I think one of Sabertooth's passives is really good. His passives basically give him crit damage, guaranteed crit rate, and then chance to increase his crit damage over 200%. And then the other one gives him a heal. So yeah, they haven't increased his heal or done anything like that, but yeah, they did put these effects on his skills rather than on his passive. So in PvE, you're going to have to press his skills in a very particular order to make sure you get these buffs in the right order, especially something like skill damage, bonus damage. If you don't press this skill or whatever, if this effect gets cleansed, it's going to hurt his damage a lot. And then his 5th skill, Raging Outburst, gives him a fat, crazy frenzy buff, 55, 70, 20. Nutty. It also gives him Ignore Dodge, and it gives him some debuffs to the enemy. So Sabertooth, like Wolverine looks really good, but Sabertooth actually looks really good as well, and also has iframe ignore. So you're thinking, is Sabertooth PvP viable? Well, take a look a little bit later at his artifact. Okay, at Sabertooth's artifacts, it'll be familiar. I forgot that I didn't talk about why it's good to have the iframe ignore and the bigger buffs on his 5th skill for Wolverine. The short answer is the 5th skills do more damage. For almost every character in the game, their 5th skill and their 4th skill are where the majority of their damage comes from, if it doesn't come from the tier 3, right? So although you can have some really meta effects on your 3rd skill, look at Jean Grey, the 4th skill and the 5th skill are usually where you want to see the biggest, most sweeping power moves, like iframe ignore, etc. Like if you take a look at, Hulk's 4th skill having iframe ignore, you see what I'm saying, where you want that big damage to be, you want those big effects to be on the skills that deal big damage rather than small damage. And the thing is, unfortunately, with Wolverine, with his counter skill, it didn't always work, right? So for those of you that played a lot with him in PvP or watched like Commander's videos, burning counter didn't always trigger, and it was something that the devs didn't really address. So although I'd rather them address it because I think counter's really cool, I can also appreciate them just taking it out of the game for now, or maybe permanently, because it's just not an effect that they can guarantee will work all the time, right? And if you can't guarantee the quality and an accuracy of something, and it's better not to have it in the game. So that's kind of how I feel about that. So, okay, keep that in mind. Also keep in mind Sabertooth's artifact, okay? Wolverine's tier 4, check this out. Wolverine's tier 4, I'm going to tier 4 him as soon as I can. Increases all basic attacks by 80%, which is generic, but cool. It's a pretty high number. Increases active buff effect by 20%. Now that's serious because it may stack with his other active buffs. Like this active buff effect might increase the 80% by 20%. You feel me? Yeah, which would push it to almost 100% attack. But then he also gets a 60% increased max HP for 7 seconds. If that also gets increased, then that 60% goes up even higher to like, whatever, 75% or 72%. You feel me? But that's not all. All of the active buffs increases... it says active buff effect. But anyways, any other active buffs that he has, right? Remember, applies to self, right? Ignore dodge by 50%. That could go up by 20%. Decrease debuff duration by 90%. If that goes up by 20%, he basically has cleanse. It's basically like a 7-second debuff removal, because the debuffs will be removed more than 100%, right? That their duration will be reduced by more than 100%, which basically reduces them to 0. His 60% penetration, that's going to go up by 20%. You feel me? All of these buffs that are like, oh, they're pretty good, they're all going to go up by 20%. Again, when you as long as you trigger them after the tier 4 within that 7-second window. It's not like forever type thing, right? But it is very, very strong. And we'll see how fast he charges up his tier 4. If it's fast like Jean Grey, you might be able to have this buff up all the time, which would be absolutely nutty. So I'm very excited. I like tier 4 skills that are two-way buffs, right, for PvE and PvP. So I'm very, very excited for that. And then Sabertooth tier 3, it looks pretty much like you'd expect. It's kind of, I don't want to say generic, but it's very Sabertooth. He goes crazy and he slashes, and then there's a bunch of slashes on the screen, and the screen's filled with slashes. Slash, 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 right? We didn't really have any other expectations for Sabertooth tier 3. It also gives him a 150% damage proc, whoa, which should be pretty nuts for him, and it should make his tier 3 hit super duper hard. So yeah, bestial attack. Now, remember I said Sabertooth could be used for PvP? Take a look at his artifact. Hey, it's the applies to self, guard break immunity, HP does not drop below 1, does not drop to 1 or below, I read that super wrong, recovers 50% of HP after the effect ends. He has the immortality artifact. So Wolverine, aww, and Sabertooth are best friends forever, even though they're actually like mortal arch nemesis. I mean, they've worked together in the past. They're not like, you know, they come from the same, they're cut from the same cloth. So they have a lot in common, and obviously no surprise here. But yeah, you could make a full, and you could make potentially a viable immortality team with Wolverine and Sabertooth and Carnage and maybe Magic and maybe somebody else. That's pretty crazy, right? To have all those dudes with the immortality passive. Pretty nuts. So that's it for the new uniforms for the existing characters. Now, some other changes that we sort of didn't expect, but it's good to see that they're still monitoring the situation. They've made Kang World Boss Legend a little bit easier. So they've changed some of the unlock challenge requirements in terms of the time it takes. So for all the other World Boss Legends and all the other World Boss Ultimates, the unlock challenges are clear within 150 seconds on all of the stages that end with 9, right? 9, 19, 29, 39, 49, except 99, of course. Clear within 150 seconds and clear within 100 seconds. You have to do each of these challenges once, or you have to pay the crystals, right? They're changing it specifically for Kang, not for all the world bosses, but specifically for Kang. They're making the 150 seconds up to 180 seconds, so they're adding 30 seconds, which is a lot. And then for the 100-second challenge, they're bumping it up to 150 seconds, which is a massive, massive difference. So it should be a lot more doable, feasible, right, for players to clear the challenges. And there should be no excuses for you guys to get up to stage 20 Kang to start farming those better booty boxes. They've also made the Otherworld daily and weekly challenges, the quests for Otherworld Battle, easier. So before, there was a quest that honestly sometimes I couldn't complete because I just wasn't getting lucky enough with my wins. Win with all characters alive, of course, and at 70% HP or higher, right? So all five of your characters had to survive, and all 5 of them had to be at 70% HP or higher. And that was a weekly and a daily challenge. Now they've reduced it to 50% HP. So it's still the same sort of thing, like all 5 of your characters have to survive, but only at half HP or higher instead of 70. So these are really good changes to make the quests more obtainable and to make it more accessible to players, not hoping for just like random bouts of massive RNG, right, in their favor. And then they tried to fix a game error bug where the maximum points in Challenger League was displaying as 5,500. I don't know if they've still addressed, or they haven't yet addressed, the seasonal rewards not resetting for Otherworld Battle, because I know that's also an issue for some players. So yeah, I'm very excited. I'm very, very excited for Wolverine, if you can't tell, and of course Sabertooth. I'll see you guys tonight. Thank you so much for watching the video. Smash the like button. It helps the channel. Take care.